So, have you ever felt like you perceive the world just a little bit differently than everyone else? Or maybe that information, knowledge, insights about reality, it just arrives in ways that seem to bypass the usual channels?
Yeah, it's more than just a thought experiment, isn't it? This idea that our everyday perception might only be like one layer
Right.
of a much richer, more complex reality, one we can maybe tune into.
Absolutely. And that's the fascinating place we're venturing into today. Welcome, fellow wanderers, you curious, introspective seekers of presence. We're sort of on a journey together here, digging deep into some really thought-provoking source material.
Yeah, and our source for this particular deep dive, it's a transcript from a YouTube conversation with Matías de Stefano. The channel's called ¿A dónde vamos cuando soñamos?
Okay.
And it's this really rich exploration. It touches on, well, everything from the idea of indigo children and different ways of seeing reality.
Right. To the fundamental nature of existence as, like, vibration and information. And even gets into some incredibly practical things for living in harmony.
So our mission today, really, and what we always try to do is unpack this source material, find those, crucial nuggets of knowledge.
Yeah.
And help you, our listener, navigate this whole landscape. What does it mean to see the world differently? What practical wisdom can we actually get from a perspective that seems to connect everything? That's what we're setting out to discover together.
And this deep exploration, helping you find those shortcuts to getting informed, making connections maybe you hadn't seen. Well, this is what we do right here on the Presence Podcast.
Exactly. So if you find value in taking these kinds of deep dives with us, please do think about liking this and subscribing. It helps us keep doing these explorations.
Definitely.
All right, so let's settle in and unpack this, starting with the term maybe a lot of people have heard of, Indigo Child. Matías mentions this concept. It popped up in the 80s and 90s. That's right. Yeah, it came out of those early studies, people trying to photograph the human energy field, the aura, some call it.
Okay.
Researchers started noticing that a particular generation of kids arriving then, they seemed to consistently show this prominent indigo or violet color in their energy.
And that specific color pattern, it was unusual enough to label them, right? The indigo generation or indigo children.
Exactly. It wasn't the typical energy pattern they were seeing before. It stood out.
And the common understanding that sort of followed was that these kids had a different way of being or perceiving, often linked to like being more spiritual or connected to nature.
Yeah, that became the popular interpretation.
Right.
But Matías, he offers a slightly different take, maybe more expansive.
How so?
Well, he sees that indigo or violet color not just as purely spiritual, but as representing transcendence or vision.
Oh.
For him, it signifies a different way of perceiving reality itself. And that vision, it could show up through art or science, music, any field, really.
So like a generation transitioning towards a new way of seeing things.
Pretty much, yeah, that's the idea. And his own experience, it really aligns with this, right?
Yeah.
From a very young age.
Right.
He talks about seeing and interacting with these non-physical beings. He calls them pedagogues from the fifth dimension, almost from birth.
Wow.
And these beings, he says, they helped him understand reality, emotions, interactions, stuff most kids aren't dealing with.
And the amazing part is, he says at first, this just felt completely normal to him.
Yeah, just his reality.
So when did that change? When did he realize others weren't seeing this?
That came later, and yeah, it was pretty challenging. He describes thinking something was really wrong with him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, fearing things like schizophrenia, and he actually went looking for psychological help to try and understand it.
That makes sense. But his family background was interesting, wasn't it? They were agnostic.
Right, and that seems key. They didn't immediately jump to religious explanations or dogma. They tended to see his experiences more as, like, intense creativity. And his mother, especially, she really trusted her gut feeling. Instead of panicking or labeling it, she just felt it wasn't a problem in that sense, just unorganized.
Unorganized. Interesting.
Yeah. And that intuition led her to help him connect with people who could maybe help him structure all this information he was getting.
That story really highlights something important, doesn't it? Why so many people who might perceive things differently are just afraid to talk about it.
Absolutely. Society tends to go one of two ways, right? Either dismiss it completely, you're crazy, or immediately slap a spiritual label on it.
Right. Fit it into old boxes, channeler, psychic, whatever.
Exactly. Another kind of box, like you said. And Matías's insight here is crucial. It's not necessarily about seeing something supernatural or needing a label.
Okay.
It's about having a different perception of something that is actually there. And this perception maybe could be explained through science or psychology or other ways too, not just spirituality.
Okay, so let's get into the kind of information he was receiving. You mentioned early on it felt quite tranquil. What was that like?
Yeah, he gives examples like learning how to talk to a plant or understanding a friend's emotional state on a deeper level.
Sort of intuitive stuff.
Right, simple intuitive understandings of the energetic reality right around him.
But then there was a big shift around age 13.
Yeah, this was major, a really intense experience. He describes this dense, what he calls a darker being,
Yeah.
physically opening a door in his classroom.
Whoa, in class.
Yeah, and the message was powerful. It told him about a future role he'd have, about saying something that would transform people, even mentioned planetary adjustments.
That sounds incredibly heavy for a 13-year-old.
Oh, absolutely. Must have been overwhelming. And looking back, he sees that moment as like the point where he realized all the earlier, smaller perceptions were kind of prep work.
Preparation for something bigger.
Exactly, something with much larger implications.
You mentioned darker versus luminous beings. He explains that's not about good versus evil, right? It's about density.
Precisely. His view is that density relates to how close something is to matter. Denser frequencies, they need more energy exchange, like a give and take, almost transactional.
Okay.
Whereas lighter, subtler frequencies, they need less exchange. More about service.
So darkness here isn't inherently bad, energetically speaking.
No, not necessarily. Density means things can manifest faster, actually. The potential for negative stuff comes in if there's a lack of consciousness or responsibility around that power.
Oh, okay.
If you try to force rapid results without understanding the energy involved, the feedback loop can be pretty rough.
Got it. And what about these angels or other entities he perceives? His definition feels a bit different.
Yeah, he brings it right back to the word's origin. Angel, from the Greek angelo, just means messenger.
Messenger, okay.
So fundamentally, that's what they are for him, messengers.
Yeah.
Packages of information, frequencies, different states of consciousness, or even how atoms are ordered.
And our mind kind of interprets these frequencies, puts wings on them or whatever.
Exactly. Our perception, filtered through our human brain and all our conditioning, shapes how that frequency, that information package appears to us. It's like tuning into different radio stations that are always out there. And your brain translates the signal into something you can process, an image or a form.
Matías also really stresses that his role wasn't about being some kind of savior figure, which seems like a heavy burden often put on people labeled indigo.
Right. He saw the information he got not as the ultimate answer, but more like a map.
A map.
Yeah, a map designed to help other people understand their own paths, navigate their own reality. He basically made his map public,
Okay.
so that anyone who resonated with its frequency could find it and use it for their own journey. The insight is his perception is there to empower your exploration, not dictate it.
And this really connects to his bigger perspective, that everything is interconnected. He sees links between fields most of us see as totally separate, right? Quantum physics, ancient myths, politics, even ETs.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really mind-bending. Matías's view is that at the source of information, the origin point, everything is connected.
Okay.
It's our human minds, he says, trying to survive and navigate the physical world that create these separate packages of information. We filter things out, we label stuff, we build this idea of my reality that feels separate.
But the deeper truth, according to him,
In the real universe, as he sees it, that concept of my reality is this isolated bubble. It doesn't really hold up fundamentally. It's just one particular viewpoint within this incredibly interconnected, energetic web.
which leads us right into the core of how he sees reality itself. What is it?
He describes it as fundamentally frequencies, vibrations, always trying to organize themselves into harmony.
Okay.
So the physical world we see, our bodies, this chair, a plant, it's a perception, built up over millions of years from smaller bits, protons, neutrons, electrons, which are also just trying to organize.
So the basic building blocks aren't really solid things then?
Not in the way we think of them. He sees them more as like magnetic or energetic meeting points, confluences.
Wow.
So in a way, we're perceptions that come from something that in its pure essence isn't a fixed, solid thing. It's just energy organizing.
And what's the logic behind all this organizing? What's driving it?
He uses the term syntonias, which is like frequencies or harmonies seeking harmonio overall harmony.
Syntonias seeking harmonia.
Yeah. And what we perceive as physical forms, he suggests, are the geometric patterns that emerge from these underlying harmonies. He mentions things like tetrahedrons potentially being involved. That's his model for the basic logic of creation.
So things like religions or sciences or myths, how do they fit in?
He sees them as different patterns, different cultural frameworks that people resonate with, different ways to tap into or understand this underlying drive for harmony.
Okay.
He mentions the cross, for example, as a pattern representing a coordinate in space-time. But at their core, they're all systems humans develop to interact with this reality of vibrations ordering themselves.
And circling back to different beings, aliens, humans, angels, where do they fit in this vibrational model?
Matías gives this great yes and no answer. It depends on the level of perception you're tuned into.
Right.
At the deepest essence, they're all just different possibilities of how atoms and energy can arrange themselves. So when you perceive an angel or an alien, you're not necessarily seeing some separate being flying in from somewhere else.
You're tuning into a different frequency, like that radio analogy again.
Exactly. You are syntonizing yourself, tuning your own system to resonate with another consciousness, another state of being, another information package that you just don't normally perceive in your everyday state, accessing another channel, basically.
You mentioned earlier he uses the word remembering, but not just for past lives.
Yes, he gives it this really rich meaning. He connects it to the Latin recordare, to tie chords, or recordes, to return to the heart.
So connecting things, tying cords.
Fundamentally, it's about connecting data points across huge spans of time and across fields that seem unrelated. It's seeing the underlying logic, the thread that ties together something from 12,000 years ago, maybe a myth, a scientific theory, something that happened yesterday, and maybe a potential future.
Wow.
So the insight is remembering is this active process of finding the interconnected logic that weaves through all time and knowledge.
And a key part of his own process, you said, is doubt. He emphasizes doubt.
Always. He says he confidently doubts what he receives. And the reason is critical.
Why?
Because doubt, when you approach with openness, with curiosity, actually allows more data to show up.
Yeah.
It challenges the first piece of info.
Right.
Which then requires confirmation or more context, and that brings in other pieces of the puzzle, strengthening the overall picture. It's doubting to open possibilities, not shut them down by saying, nope, can't be.
And this need for confirmation, it ties into his search for external validation when he was young. There was that key moment when he was 14.
Yeah, really pivotal. He'd seen a few psychologists who didn't quite get it. Then he met one who just listened. For like an hour and a half, no interruptions.
Yeah.
And then this psychologist apparently pointed to her bookshelves, filled with books on related topics, and said that talking to him actually helped her understand those concepts better.
That must have been huge for him. Incredibly validating.
Totally. And she then connected him with an engineering professor who was actually studying unusual phenomena.
Okay.
And this professor could tell Matías, look, what you're perceiving, it's discussed, it's documented in studies, in books.
So the validation wasn't about seeking praise, but confirming his perception was tuning into something real, something others had touched on.
Exactly. He wasn't alone, he wasn't crazy. His perception, however different, was connecting to something tangible that others, maybe in separate fields, had also explored. It normalized it for him.
Right. Okay, so with this extraordinary way of perceiving reality, how does he navigate just everyday life? He uses that analogy, right? Reality as a game.
Yeah, the game of being. Information comes through perception. He needs to be open to receive it, transmit it, but not get so overwhelmed that he can't actually function in the game.
He also uses that metaphor of Earth as a living being.
Right. Sees Earth as conscious, and humans like its neurons, making connections, synapses, sharing data, experiences. And he sees his own role as just one of those neurons, moving around, connecting information points in service to that larger consciousness.
So that keeps it lighter, not some heavy personal mission.
Exactly. It frames it as a game or a service, not this huge personal burden.
Now, it's easy for people with these kinds of perceptions to get put on a pedestal, right? Which can lead to, spiritual ego. How does he avoid that?
He ties it directly to this deep knowing about death that he seems to carry from his perceptions. He says having this awareness of having died many times, understanding that energy just transforms. It makes clinging to this specific life, this identity, unnecessary.
So he sees Matías, the person, as more like a temporary tool.
Pretty much. Not a self that needs to survive at all costs or be the center of attention. He uses the tool, sure, but he also talks about how he often just disappears from public view. He doesn't need that constant external validation loop.
Yeah.
His own perception of himself within the bigger picture is what matters.
And he directly links that spiritual ego trap to the basic need for survival.
Yeah, he says that drive to survive is what fuels the spiritual ego.
Yeah.
If you really get that the underlying energy, the consciousness doesn't actually end, then the need to constantly prove that this specific package you is important or special, it just diminishes.
That's a powerful insight.
Yeah, shedding the fear of dying, your current concept of self, actually frees you from needing to be the center. And he adds, at the core, everyone comes into this reality game to experience something fundamental about being.
That really touches on that universal fear, doesn't it? The fear of death, that core existential doubt we all have. What's his perspective on what actually happens when this package dissolves?
He frames it using basic physics, really. Energy conservation. Energy doesn't end, it just transforms. So what stops is the specific configuration, the package of personality, identity, memories that we are right now. But the data, the energy, it continues just in a different form.
So the fear is losing awareness as the specific self, like the Oriana example he uses.
Exactly, fear of that unique instance vanishing. He also points out ancient cultures practiced dying in life. And we do it every day, in a way.
How so?
Sleep. Our focused consciousness kind of dissipates, right? The personality takes a back seat for a while. We wake up. He sees physical death as like a much longer dream state. The energy package fully dissipates and then eventually reforms into something new.
But you wouldn't have consciousness of the previous package because it's not configured that way anymore.
Exactly. The consciousness, the energy, it reunifies, expresses in a new way. We never truly cease existing, but the specific you listening right now, that transforms.
Which brings us right to that ultimate question everyone asks. Why am I conscious now? Why? This body? This time?
Yeah, the big one. Matías explains it by saying consciousness isn't just floating anchorless in the person. It's anchored in the physical system.
The body.
The cells, the glands, the neurons, and really critically, the genetic code. That code is like the result of ancient evolution. It's the hardware and the operating system of your phone, basically.
Okay, and consciousness is like the app running on it.
He uses that exact analogy. The consciousness, the app, downloads and runs based on the system's capacity, its configuration. Your specific genetics, your culture, your experiences, they all determine how information gets processed.
Right.
And how you perceive reality in this specific space-time moment. You're living the perception not just today linearly, but in that precise moving instant defined by your unique system meeting the universal frequencies.
And this connects to his idea of the fourth dimension and time.
Right. He describes the fourth dimension simply as the movement of the third dimension, length, width, depth, moving. Time, then, is just the duration of that movement. So now isn't a fixed point on a line, it's any moving instant of creation. You are constantly being that consciousness, experiencing perception in that specific instant as it unfolds.
Which makes our usual linear idea of past, present, future feel kind of limited.
It does. He mentions the movie Cloud Atlas as an analogy.
Oh, yeah.
The idea of the same underlying consciousness expressing through different packages or lives across different space-time points, maybe even simultaneously. Actions in one point resonating elsewhere.
Right.
Fits better with deep interconnectedness than a strict line. Our linear thinking, he suggests, is necessary for our 3D brains to function, to survive here. But other dimensions, other realities, they don't necessarily play by our cultural rules or logic.
So if reality is this game of frequencies and patterns, how does someone consciously, access other dimensions or to change their own perception, their syntonia?
Matías connects it back to cosmic algorithms and our genetic code, like the ones and zeros of our system. Tuning into a specific reality means consciously aligning your own frequency with that reality's frequency.
Like the law of attraction idea.
Similar, yeah. But he really stresses it's not just about wanting something. It requires fully vibrating at that level. Your whole biological system, down to your cells, needs to resonate with it, needs to believe it fundamentally.
So you basically need to update your own internal system, your software.
Exactly. He uses the phone analogy again. Got to clean the phone, update the system. Which means clearing out old programs, traumas, limiting beliefs through self-work.
Therapy, introspection, that kind of thing.
Whatever works for you. That process creates space within your system, space for new information, new frequencies, new possibilities to actually download. If new things aren't arriving, maybe the system's just full of old stuff.
And he says it works if it aligns with your underlying program, your essence, and if you have the disposition, the willingness to actually engage.
Yeah. Belief itself is a powerful part of our biological programming. If a practice helps your system function better, he asks, What's the harm? As long as it's not creating unhealthy dependence. But changing your program means systemic change.
Not just superficial stuff.
Right. Work, relationships, habits. Because it's not that others are making you bad, it's that you are operating within a certain program or frequency.
So you need to resyntonize or retune yourself.
Exactly. And he makes this really cool point. True freedom isn't escaping programs entirely. It's learning to consciously play with them, understanding them, choosing which frequencies to engage. He links our basic good-bad judgment back to our old reptilian survival brain.
Does Matías still deal with his own programs, his own challenges?
Oh, absolutely. He's very open about it. He has normal human conflicts, family stuff, personal struggles, but his approach is key. He puts them into judgment.
Yeah.
Not judging good or bad, but asking, okay, what's this here to teach me? What program needs work here?
Constant inner work.
Yeah. He shared that recent example, remember, intentionally trying to die his ego concept in front of investors.
Right, making a fool of himself, feeling awful.
But then realizing, I was operating from a scarcity program, needing external validation for survival. He saw that uncomfortable moment as huge learning, a chance to adjust his frequency.
And he admits he falls back into old patterns, like weekly. That feels very human.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it's such a good reminder for all of us, right? Don't beat yourself up when you slip back. It's part of the tuning process.
He uses another great analogy for this constant adjustment, the guitar.
Yeah, the body, your whole system, it's like a guitar. That's your program.
Yeah.
And sometimes it goes out of tune. You feel discord. Things sound bad. You have to adjust it. And maybe you sound terrible publicly while you're tuning. But you learn to tune this specific guitar, your unique system. Everything external affects the tuning.
So recordar, remembering, in that context, is like remembering how to tune it.
Precisely. Remembering the tools, the insights therapy, understanding your past, conscious practices, whatever, helps bring your system back into harmony.
Right.
And yeah, he admits it's tiring work.
Right.
Because it's constant.
Right.
But it's necessary if you want to make beautiful music, live a life that resonates with your true frequency.
And the exhaustion comes when you turn the music, the art of living, into a job, into slavery, like he puts it.
Yeah, when it feels like this heavy obligation instead of a conscious choice, a creative act. He also mentioned how in the past he used to adjust his own song, his expression, to fit what others wanted.
Out of fear of not being accepted.
Exactly. That survival ego wanting to be what others need it to be. But letting that survival concept of Matías die allowed his true essence, his real frequency, to come through. And guess what? That attracted the right people, the ones who resonated with his actual map.
There's that fear again, though. Fear of letting the familiar, surviving self die. Sacrificing relationships, jobs built on the old program.
And Matías stresses, the universe isn't forcing this on you. It's not some cosmic test. The fear pops up when you internally realize the program you're running is holding you back from your authentic self.
Okay.
Facing that truth, that fear, that's the necessary step for alignment. He thinks religion and science sometimes fail people because they impose these obligations that create that fear and conflict.
A key point he keeps coming back to is there is no rush.
Yeah, this is so fundamental to his whole view. Cosmically, the universe has billions of years. Stars burn helium forever, basically. Human life is a blink.
Right.
So there's no cosmic deadline for enlightenment or saving the planet on that huge scale. The feeling of rush usually comes when you, the individual, realize, hey, I can do something. You find a purpose, a mission. That creates personal urgency.
And maybe desperation if it feels like the only thing.
Exactly. His core message is simpler. Just be yourself. Authentically. Everything else, your path, your purpose, flows from that. And the no rush idea stops the comparison game.
Right. Who's more enlightened? Who's faster?
Yeah. Competing like that, he warns, can actually make you energetically implode, become like a black hole. Just shine at your own pace. His own sense of rush, he says, is more about working with this current version of his program before it naturally shifts, like harvesting a crop when it's ready.
This has been such a huge, expansive deep dive, connecting so many dots. To bring this back down to earth, something practical for our listeners, our fellow wanderers, navigating their own game. Matías offers this sacred trinity of harmony.
Yeah, he presents these as 3 really practical daily things you can do for internal transformation, for retuning your own frequency. And he's super clear. You know, he struggles with them too. It's not like he's perfected it. They're just accessible tools for everyone.
Okay, so the first one is conscious eating.
Sounds simple, right? But the principle is deep. What you eat is what you are. The energy, the information in your food, that becomes the energy and information in your own body.
Yeah.
So it's not about a specific diet, necessarily. It's about bringing awareness to what you eat, how you eat it, the intention behind it. That food energy literally multiplies your DNA, continues your biological program.
So conscious eating can actually change your perception by changing your energy matrix.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
It helps tune the physical guitar.
Okay. Number 2 is conscious breathing.
Again, sounds obvious, but the awareness is everything. How you breathe, mouth or nose, shallow or deep, the pace.
Yeah.
Even just counting seconds for inhale, hold, exhale. That directly affects your body's harmony system, your nervous system. Consciously breathing helps stabilize emotions without needing complicated practices. It gives you oxygen, brain energy, balances hormones, even improves relationships and how you receive subtle information.
Create space inside.
Exactly. It creates space for other frequencies, helps adjust the tuning pegs on the guitar.
And the third one is laughing.
Yeah, laughing more. Especially, he says, laughing at your own problems, your misfortunes. Yeah. Laughter releases good brain chemicals, dopamine, endorphins. But deeper than that, it sends a signal to your old survival brain
What kind of signal?
that the tense situation, it's not actually a life or death threat. Everything is okay, laughter tells your nervous system. It helps re-educate it out of that constant survival mode, that good, bad, fight or flight.
Wow.
It's simple, it's free, and it directly shifts your internal frequency. He says a truly spiritual being isn't known by visions, but by being able to smile, find humor, even when things are tough.
Conscious eating, conscious breathing, laughing, they seem so basic, but when you frame them as tuning your own frequency, tuning your system.
That's powerful. Food for the biological history, breathing for the emotional history, laughter for that spiritual connection, as he puts it. They're direct ways anyone can start consciously playing with their own syntonia, their internal harmony. And that changes how you perceive the whole game.
This deep dive into Matías de Stefano's perspective, it's been really, really eye-opening. He was asked, what would he be without this unique perception? And his answer was, he'd probably be a history or language teacher, basically an educator of consciousness.
Yeah, it illustrates beautifully, doesn't it? His core path is about sharing understanding, connecting people to deeper realities.
Yeah.
The specific way the knowledge comes is secondary almost.
Right. And for you, our fellow wanderers listening right now, here's maybe a final thought to chew on as you continue your own exploration. If reality is, as Matías suggests, fundamentally a game of frequencies and patterns organizing into harmony, how might consciously adjusting your own internal syntonia, maybe through simple daily things like mindful eating, focused breathing, genuine laughter, how might that start to fundamentally change the very game you perceive yourself to be playing?
Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep tuning your own unique frequency in this, well, incredible dance of reality. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thank you. And if you found value here, please think about leaving a review or a rating, and definitely subscribe to the Presences podcast so you can join us for future deep dives into more of these fascinating topics.